A US-led campaign to boost global democracy and fight authoritarianism is poised to begin this coming hour. More than 100 world leaders will gather online for the so-called Summit for Democracy. Joe Biden is set to launch the two-day conference. It's seen as a test for the American president, who has vowed to return the US to global leadership. Controversy, though, has courted the summit even before it begins. Major powers like Russia and China have been excluded from that invite list. But Taiwan has been given the chance to participate, stoking anger from Beijing. The White House says that it will approach the summit from a place of humility.
Make no mistake, we're at a moment of democratic reckoning, when the greatest challenges we face cross borders, regions, and domains of expertise.
Live now to our correspondents in Washington and Beijing. First, Simon Marks joins us from Washington, D.C. Simon, ambitious aims for this summit, but criticism over the invite list. Does it threaten to overshadow the event, or could it perhaps result in some tangible gains?
I think to some extent it is already overshadowing the event. And remember, Dawn, that this is not the event that President Biden initially anticipated. He started talking about this democracy summit when he was on the campaign trail before the 2020 election. And then he envisaged a massive in-person event here in Washington, D.C., world leaders traveling here from all over the globe to send a very clear message to China, to Russia, and to other authoritarian states that liberal democracies and their governments could still deliver on the promises and pledges that they have made to their peoples. But fast forward to today, and COVID-19 has meant that this event has to take place virtually, not in person. But also there are lingering doubts about the strength of American democracy that the president didn't anticipate would still be on the table today. Plus, of course, this argument over who has and who has not been invited. Why, for example, were Georgia, Nigeria and Pakistan invited? Pakistan, which only yesterday dropped out of this summit, saying that they didn't want to do anything that was going to offend China and suggest that they were piercing the one China policy. They said they were anxious about Taiwan's involvement in this summit. And yet other countries like Singapore, Sri Lanka, Thailand are not included on the guest list for this. The White House says you're not supposed to read anything into who made the cut to be invited and who didn't. But inevitably, the questions abound about the number of countries attending this summit that are officially considered backsliders on democracy by Freedom House, a very prominent bipartisan-backed Washington, D.C. think tank.
Certainly lots of confusion about the criteria for who's on the invite list and who isn't. But essentially, what the US president wants to do here is move that needle on global democracy. The US is saying that it's going through a type of reckoning in recent times. Critics, though, are also saying that he does need to keep his own house in order, as you said, Simon.
Yeah, well, the Russians, of course, characterized this summit as pathetic within the course of the last couple of days. And the questions continue to abound here about American democracy. Freedom House itself says the country is going through a rough patch. There's the head of a progressive left-wing think tank quoted in the New York Times today as saying you can't be the global fireman when your own house is on fire. And there are Democrats on Capitol Hill and elsewhere who, while being generally supportive of the idea of the democracy summit, say that President Biden and his administration ought to be doing far more to confront some of the threats that exist to American democracy, particularly efforts in some parts of the country by Republican administrations in individual states to make it harder for people in the United States to vote. So there are many countries looking at this, including Russia and China, who might cite that old proverb, physician, heal thyself. And it's definitely an issue hanging over the tapestry for this summit.
Simon, thank you very much for that. Simon Marks in Washington, D.C.
From Washington to Beijing, Olivia Seong joins us live for China's perspective. Olivia, clarify for us, China now claiming it's a democracy or a brand of democracy?
Well, that's a narrative that China has been trying to push increasingly with its latest publicity blitz. And even as we know, China has been ruled by the Communist Party since 1949. The messaging from authorities here is that China has its own version of democracy, and not only that, that this version is superior to the U.S. style of democracy. And we've seen this talked about much more by officials as well as in the Chinese state media. As we approach this U.S. Democracy Summit beginning, a meeting similarly called the International Forum on Democracy was held last weekend, organized by Beijing, and continues in these few days. Academics from around the world speaking at the event that's taking place on and offline. This also timed as China's State Council released a white paper last weekend titled China, Democracy That Works. And this Chinese system has been termed whole process democracy. And this refers to how they say people are consulted before laws are implemented. Also how there is voting at the village or township level for there to be representatives in the local legislature. And then in turn for these representatives to elect people at the next level all the way up to the top National People's Congress. Now, that referring to China's top legislature, which is made up of about 3,000 or so members. But we do have to note that this top legislature is largely ceremonial. Also, independent candidates have encountered difficulty being elected at the local level as well. Some even reportedly getting harassed or arrested.
But still no sign to the end of China's anger at the snub to Joe Biden's summit, even calling the U.S.'s summit a farce.
That's right. That was a comment from a Chinese vice foreign minister who also said that the summit is the very opposite of democracy, adding that it is divisive and pointing fingers at other countries. Beijing, of course, also irritated that Taiwan has been invited to this meeting. It considers the self-ruled island a part of its territory. And China has hit back, saying that democracy comes in different forms and that there is no one-size-fits-all model, adding that a single yardstick should not be used to measure diverse political systems around the world. We had also seen China's foreign ministry last weekend issue a report on the state of U.S. democracy, China being very critical in what it sees as failures of the U.S. system, saying that the U.S. system is influenced by money politics and that is an example of rule of the few over the many. And it pointed to several examples like the riots and the unrest at the U.S. Capitol following the last presidential election. Also how America's high COVID-19 death toll, it's saying, is a failure of the U.S. system. Now, the timing here is also key, as we have seen a U.S.-led boycott of China's Winter Olympics that is to take place next year. Increasingly, we are seeing this China-U.S. rivalry taking on an ideological tone as China continues to deny accusations of human rights abuses, for example, in Xinjiang. Have a listen.
我想告诉你的是，美澳英加利用奥运会平台进行政治操弄，不得人心，自我孤立，也必将为其错误行径付出代价。
Now, China has not said explicitly what sort of countermeasures it could take, but it has already in its narrative been keen to say that the Chinese system is superior, allowing economic growth in the country, as well as success in bringing the COVID-19 pandemic within its borders under control.
Olivia Seong in Beijing, thank you.